I'd like to call to order the work session. The date is February 3rd. We are all present. We have two items on the agenda, and of course, I always have to remind you, Council, the staff will be pausing intermittently to answer any questions. The first item is an update on the planning efforts to celebrate Goodyear's 75th anniversary. And this is the opportunity for Council to give your feedback. Arts and Culture Administrator Guylaine Osolinsky. Present, Osolinsky.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, Council members. I'm very excited to be here this evening to present to you. So this evening, we're here to talk about Goodyear turning 75 and how we would like to celebrate this momentous occasion. You know, it's very natural when you say anniversary, it already makes you start thinking of the past, of the years that we've traveled to get to this point. But it's also important for us to remember where we are right now and where we're going for the future. But with any great story, we do have to start at the beginning. So on November 19th in 1946, Goodyear became a city. We had 1,250 residents at that time. And as you can see through the years, we have grown in population every year. We haven't had a dip in that population. We continue to grow. And looking here in 2020, we're nearly 89,000 people. In 1946, our mayor was William Killip Jr., and there he is with the first city council. And I'm sure when they were sitting there, when they became a city, they had bright plans and great plans for our future. We're going to jump pretty quick here. We're going to go to 1996, and here's Mayor Bill Arnold. And in 1996, Goodyear turned 50 years old. And at that time, they were excited. It was 50 years of being a city, and they celebrated. They planned a lot of activities. They had ice cream socials. They had dances. They planted a tree at Loma Linda Park. Not only did they plant a tree, but they also planted a time capsule to remember the 50th anniversary by. Now we're going to jump to today. And tonight we're going to talk about how we're going to celebrate 75 years. What mark are we going to leave? What legacy are we going to leave for those that then in 2046 get to celebrate 100 years of Goodyear? So, as I said, it's time to celebrate. Goodyear turns 75, and we turned 75 on November 19th of 2021. And this is a big deal. So we needed to get a planning committee together to try to identify the best way for us to celebrate. And so we have a cross-departmental planning committee that had staff members from economic development, the mayor's office, city manager's office, communications, city clerk, Parks and Rec. So many departments came together to really look at what our event vision would be and what goals are we trying to accomplish with celebrating 75 years. And one of the big things was we needed to look at our past, but we really wanted to pay attention to our present and our future as well. They also wanted to engage all citizens. This is an exciting time. Our citizens are proud of where they live, and we want to make sure that there was activities that everybody could be involved in. And so with having these goals, it really made sense that we can't just celebrate on one day. We need a year-long celebration. So with that, the committee has identified that they would like to see us celebrate starting in January of 2021 and celebrate all the way through November 19th of 2021. So when you're looking at how we celebrate for a year, one of the great things that came out of the committee was to infuse celebration activities into a lot of our existing programs and activities that we do that are very successful. Things such as at our ballpark, we do movie nights. We actually have this big, beautiful screen now. The movies are beautiful there. And we can have a 1946 themed movie night where we show the top films from 1946. Another great activity that we do, we have a fall and spring concert series that we do at Goodyear Community Park. And we'd like to take one of those concerts and have a swing dance party. Have some swing music, have some dance instructors out there, and just have a great time. Another activity we're looking at, many of you probably were there Saturday for our Heart and Soul Run. It was very successful. We would like to infuse 75 years into that by adding a 7.5K distance to our Heart and Soul Run, which not only lets us celebrate 75 years, but it gives our participants another distance to reach for and gives them an extra thing to try out. So, along with having our different activities, we have our arts and culture, our hot coffee art lecture series that we can infuse the celebration into, our recreation programming. We have summer rec and youth sports. Through our communications department, there's lots of opportunities for doing a 75-year logo, having traffic or light pole banners, flags, lots of different activities that we can do just to infuse right into what we're doing. Our ballpark staff, they do a great job with fan experiences at spring training. They're already thinking about spring training 2021 and how we can infuse these activities into that. So with a great celebration, not only do we want to infuse these into our existing programs, but we also have some new activities that we'd like to do that will just be special for 2021. And one of those is an art component. So across the United States, different cities have tried an temporary public art installation that it depends on the city you're in. This example up here are horses, but different cities will pick an object or an animal or something, and different artists paint each one, and they're exhibited throughout the city. Nashville does guitars. And where this all started was actually in Chicago, and it was called the Cow Parade. And they did cows throughout all of Chicago, and different artists painted them. They were themed different ways, and they were just really fun and unique. The city of St. Louis, when they turned 250, they did 250 birthday cakes that they put throughout their city. So Goodyear would like to borrow from kind of the idea of St. Louis with doing anniversary presents with our Goodyear 75 on them. But instead of doing 75 presents, we'd like to do 10 large fiberglass presents that we have different artists paint, and we'd like each present to represent a decade. One would starting with the 1940s, going through to the 2020s, and then having one present that will just be focused on Goodyear's future and where Goodyear's going. The great thing with this art component is these will be exhibited throughout the city, and it gives opportunities for residents to maybe go to a point of interest, someplace in the city they've not gone before, because we can have some sort of kind of scavenger hunt piece with this. These will be selfie spots. This will be the place where we can get a lot of traction and excitement for people traveling around and seeing these as they pop up throughout their city. Other activities that we would like to do would be, as I said, we'd like to kick this year-long celebration off in January of 2021. So we'd have our celebration launch as a ceremonial event that we have at our current city hall. We'd invite schools, schools to participate, some of our historic Goodyear families, and our dignitaries. And really, this will be our launch just to kick off and say, hey, Goodyear's turning 75. We want you to know that we're celebrating. We then will have our second event will be how we conclude our year-long celebration, which would be an anniversary festival. And that'll be on November 19th, 2021, our anniversary date. That festival will have live music, food, activities, fun. That's where you bring out the whole family. And this is our big blowout. And we would like to hold this event, construction permitting, we'd like to hold this event at our Civic Square Park. We may be far enough along to do it. If we're not far enough along, we'll have it at Bullard Wash Park at the same area. And the reason this is important is because, as I said, the celebration launch in January, we're going to hold at our current city hall. But we love this arc that we started our city hall and we're going to end the festival where our new city hall is going to be. And it really demonstrates where we are now and where we're going for the future. Now, the final thing that we have up here as part of our year-long celebration is I mentioned that at the 50th anniversary, they did bury a time capsule. And as you can see on the plaque that's on the time capsule, it's to be opened on November 19th, 2021. So at the anniversary festival, we're going to open up that time capsule and explore all the great things that they've left behind for us that help us remember where they were in 1996. They've even wrote a letter that we're to read at that time that's to the residents of 2021. Following along with that tradition, we'd like to also do a 75th anniversary time capsule. And so we will be packing all of our stuff into our 75th anniversary time capsule at the festival as well. With having this year-long celebration, we'll actually be able to engage with residents and others to have them give us input of what objects should go in this time capsule, because this is important. We want to really have a lot of input and thought into what items tell people about where we were in 2021 and who we are as a city. So as you can see, these activities are really about planning activities that our residents are excited to be a part of, that they want to come out, that there's multiple things for them to do, whether they enjoy 7.5K runs or art lectures. There's something for everyone. We want to engage our business community, our Goodyear business community. They are great, and we want them part of this. We want to involve our organizations, our city organizations, such as our commissions, as well as our arts organizations and historic organizations. We'd like to get them involved now so that they have some input on our planning and activities that we're going to be doing. It's about our elected officials that serve our city, that are excited and so proud of their city. We want to celebrate with our staff. They put the great in Goodyear. They're proud of their city as well. It's really about fun for all. And so, Mayor and Council, before I turn this over, I did want to share that this staff is anticipating costs of $140,000 for these activities. That budget request would fall over 2 fiscal years, and that'll be part of your annual budget process. It'll be a supplemental to come before you for consideration. But with that, I'd like to turn it over. I'm excited to hear your thoughts and comments, and I'm just excited for Goodyear to be 75. So thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to talk first? Sherry?
I think you all came up with, you and staff and everyone who collaborated on this came up with some great ideas, and very excited for this. When you said 1996 was 25 years ago, that didn't seem like 25 years ago. So that was like, ow, but thank you. So I think that's a great idea. And so thank you for all the hard work. And I look forward to the different variety. And I think the budget sounds fine, because it sounds like you're already incorporating some of this into other events as well. So go for it.
Next. Bill?
I like all the ideas. I think it certainly will touch every avenue that we've got in the city. I'm suspecting that we're not kicking this off at the old City Hall because it's not big enough. Is that why we're choosing not to be down on Litchfield Road, as opposed to for those of us that have been here, the interim office building that we currently call City Hall?
Mayor, Vice Mayor Stipp, that's a great question. I don't even know if we had considered going to the old City Hall, but that's definitely something we could take back to the committee and discuss if that's an option. We are open to any of those discussions. So I appreciate the input and feedback this evening.
I think it would be kind of neat if we kicked it off from where this thing started and then ended it where it's going to be in the next, 75 years, theoretically. The other thing that in the picture of the 1996 plaque, with the time capsule, most of those folks, I think, are still in the community that were on that plaque, or at least nearby. And I think it would be really an interesting avenue to try to get as many of them there as well. If we really want to touch back to what happened 25 years ago, I think that'd be kind of cool. But other than that, I think everything is great. I love the idea of the banners and the anniversary presents. 75 is what? Is that silver? I don't. Is it diamond?
It is a diamond celebration.
Diamond? Yeah.
Well, do we all get diamonds?
No.
Where's Joanne?
Yeah, exactly. No. I'm certainly not suggesting that. But I think trying to incorporate that into each one of those, present designs is a really kind of neat way to tie this all together and try to energize the community. I think most everybody doesn't realize we've even got an anniversary coming up. So spreading it out throughout the year, I think, is a really good approach. So thanks to everybody. Please pass along my thanks to everybody on the committee.
This is unusual for me to speak, but just to tag along with that. I think we should make a calling for the residents who have lived here for 25 years. And do something special and have them introduce and come as a group, and so that tells the longevity of each of the families. I think that would, I'll pass it on.
Great recommendation, thank you.
Joe?
No, I like all the ideas that have come up, to be honest with you. I'm looking forward to see what the residents, some of the input you have as you kind of make it through the process. But, yeah, I like the variety. I like the family, events that you've got planned on there, and the piggyback on the vice mayor. Yeah, to bring, I think some of them are still around there for the, when they put that thing in the ground, so. It'd be nice to bring as many of those back again in the 25 residents been here for 25 years, and they may have some stories of what it was and what it is today, to do some comparisons, so.
We
I
might
like all of
have
those
some
pieces.
banner
Fun.
from the wear, something for them, a little sign or something that honors them with that. A sash. They could be king and queens of the day. I don't know.
But yeah, I like
Great
everything I've heard.
Great suggestions.
Wally?
Well, I think it's a great idea. I think it's really an ambitious plan because that's going to be a very busy year for everyone. As long as it doesn't take away from the events we normally have at the ballpark that families have come to love. Maybe those could be a celebration as well. Maybe the dance or something, I don't know. But even today, somebody asked me about the book sale in October. Were we still going to have the October event at the ballpark? And I said, oh, we have it every October. Not to worry. So, I too would like to hear what the residents would like to see, because it's not really important what I want. It's what they want. And if they are really they've got to be all in for it to be successful. And we need to plan it for them. Because it is because of them, that's why we're here in the first place. So,
Also the original neighborhood.
yeah,
The first
Yeah.
neighborhood developed. I
the
think
original
that,
neighborhoods, that's
yeah,
important.
I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Laura?
We're really a relatively young city, and that's just kind of amazing that we're having this great opportunity to do this. To piggyback on what Bill said about the former City Hall, I mean, there's also the Western Avenue to make it a street fair kind of thing, too. I mean, it seems like there's just possibilities. That whole intersection, that area is really foundational for Goodyear. I really like the idea of honoring the longtime residents, but we also realize that so many people coming in have no idea of Goodyear history, and so they're going to be learning along. And because it's a year-long celebration, as we get new residents, they'll get to join in. So I really like the approach instead of just a one and done, that you're doing it over a stretch of time. And I also like the idea of infusing it into the existing activities, because it's just really efficient to do it that way. I mean, that's really good planning, and it's easy to have a segment of that in it. So I love the art part. I love just thinking at it from so many perspectives. So it is going to touch everybody. Well done.
Thank you.
Brandon?
Yeah, I also do I think all their ideas are great. I like the swing dancing. I think that's going to be fun. And then I like the race, extending the race idea. I think that's good. And then the presents. I know you said it's temporary art. Do you plan on reusing it somewhere? Or I like the idea of it. I just want to know, if we're going to put all that work into having the artists do that, is there a place for presents combined in a place going forward? Or should we do something else besides presents that is a installed art? We'll bring them all together in one place eventually.
Mayor, Councilmember Hampton, great question. So we have been discussing what that looks like, whether those presents come at that anniversary festival and how those are exhibited and what we're doing with that. And so we are exploring that, and I would follow up with you on where we kind of end on what we do with those. Since they are a temporary exhibit, they are intended just to be exhibited that 1 year, but we will be exploring how we utilize those at the end of the celebration and what that looks like. Other cities have auctioned off their temporary art, and then those funds have gone to nonprofits or different things. And so there's lots of options for us to explore on what we'll do with the artwork once the 2021 concludes.
Okay. I was curious. In my mind, I was thinking to be
It's a great
someplace in the
question.
city where there's a bunch of presents sitting. I don't know that they're all done. They're like, oh, there's the present art installation. But yeah, either way, if it was temporary, I understand that. It's probably doesn't need to be. It's not built to last, so that's understandable too. So if you can go to charities and things like that, that sounds like a great alternative. And then also going to touch on I like the idea of the time capsule. I think it'd be nice to invite everybody else. I know with OK Fulton passing away recently too, I'm sure there's a lot of other people in the area that have been a part of Goodyear for quite a while. So it'd be neat to include those type of people in the celebration as well. At least 25 years, but maybe other councils of the past as well. Might be kind of fun to bring people out. And then, I really want to hit our history too. I mean, I don't know what that looks like, but in the last, maybe in the November event, something around, when I think of Goodyear, I think cotton and the airplanes, essentially, the military. So I don't know if there's anything we can do, partnerships or anything. Goodyear rubber tires. I don't know what it could be. I'm not sure we're gonna drag race or burn tires, but I don't know. But that may not, maybe not that, but something to where we can. I don't know. Maybe we can be great. If I could be king for the day, I'd love to see like the Goodyear blimp here. It'd be neat to have some other type of things that celebrate the tires. Maybe there is something we could do. Some, not drag racing, but something, I don't know, tire wise. Maybe something around cotton. Maybe I know Billy Moore Parade had like a Miss Billy Moore Parade. Maybe there was a Miss Cotton Flower. I don't know, or something. I don't know. So I don't know. Just some different things that contribute to the history. Bring that in also to the new as well, and then going forward. I like the idea of planting a tree. That might be a good thing to do as well. Maybe on our new city hall area as well. And I'm excited for all of it. I just trying to think of different things that we could do that'll just make it even better. And I don't know if when we have our Tell Two Cities or our Culture Pop,
Yes.
we've kind of gotten away from doing that now, right? It was just it's a Culture Pop now. It's not really a combination of because that was built off the centennial, right, of the state of Arizona with Avondale and Goodyear. So we're not taking away necessarily from that next year. I don't know where I'm going with. I'm just trying to think of how we can contribute that all together. So
Right. So no, we won't be taking away from any of our special events and our existing programs that we do that are very successful and that we enjoy. There's ways that we can have booths and fun activities that celebrate our 75th anniversary and really take that message to them, but we won't. Culture Pop will happen, and and all of our great events at our ballpark that will continue and have a great time. This is just the value added. This is just add on top of it, and so we're excited to be able to be part of those activities that are already our special events that we already host.
yeah, no, I like it. I don't know if 140 is enough, if that's going to do everything for you, or if you need more than that. But I like all of these added value, added portions to the city. And I think it'll be a really fun year. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Bill has another comment.
I don't want to expose necessarily the side of my personality, but NASCAR might be in that that weekend.
It is.
At the end of, it's always
In November.
in November. There may be a really good opportunity with the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company with NASCAR being in town.
Or the golf tournament was just here for the golf tournament at the airport.
Yeah.
Did you see my picture on Facebook of the blimp?
So
I saw it landing.
to get to
Great
Brandon's
suggestion.
tire
Yeah.
connection, it, it may be impossible to get the blimp, but maybe we can get some, who knows? But I
Who
love the
knows?
idea of getting
I
the
like
blimp here.
thinking big, so I like to think big and see what we can do.
Blimp. I don't think you'll have any problem with
Because
that.
they're here like 2 or 3
They've
times a
been
year.
Yeah.
they've been about everything in the valley lately. The blimp's been up there, so especially with the historical part of it, the blimps being made in Goodyear. Well, thank you for the presentation. You can see the council is excited. They gave you lots of additional ideas. So I know you and the committee are going to do a great job, but just be prepared. The council will probably play into it somewhere along the way. They'll make another suggestion or encourage you or discourage you. But anyway, we really love what you're doing. So thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
All right, then we're going to go to the second presentation. This is always exciting, and we learn something we don't know. And it talks about the present and the future, so it's a presentation and discussion on the current and projected economic climate by Jim Rounds from Rounds Consulting Group, followed by a presentation on initial estimates of the FY 2020 and the FY 2021, and a high-level 5-year forecast for the general fund by our finance manager, budget and research, Lori Wigenroth. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Jim, welcome to our City Hall tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And as Mayor said, we have Jim Rounds here from
Not
Rounds
really a City
Consulting.
Hall.
Just to give you an idea, we'll have Mr. Rounds is going to go through a presentation to kind of give you an idea of the economic environment we're going to be functioning in. And then he is welcome to questions as he goes through his presentation. There are a number of slides, but I think you'll find the information he's going to share very valuable. He will bring it down to kind of what he sees for Goodyear. And once you're had a chance to ask questions and digest his information, then I'll go over, as the mayor mentioned, a real high-level version of our typical 5-year forecast. So with that, Mr. Rounds.
Again,
Sorry, I didn't get the presentation up.
Mayor, council members, and staff, thanks for having me. I want to change it up just a little bit because I was encouraged by your previous presentation. It's hard to follow up a presentation that can legitimately have confetti falling. And so I just want to give a little bit of background. I grew up here. I went to ASU. I worked at the state capitol. I'm have been known as somewhat of a conservative economist. I'm a Goldwater Fellow, but I also have been working with the Board of Regents trying to defend the university budgets and doing the math to show that there's a positive return on investment. I've been working with Helios, Rodell, a lot of the other groups as well. And why is that? I think as over time, as my weight has gone up, my hair thickness has gone down, and the time to get out of bed has lengthened each morning, I have additional perspective on how all this stuff goes together. You can't just look at the pure economic numbers. You have to look at a lot of dynamic factors. And I was telling friends earlier that Goodyear is one of the communities that I'm the most bullish on. There's maybe 5 that I would be recommending to colleagues for future investments, looking myself even. I like the way that the community has been managed. I think it has a very strong leadership group. I've known Georgia for a while through our MAG economic development discussions, and those have always been fantastic. Staff has been excellent. And not only am I bullish on the community, but I'm bullish on the state of Arizona. And why I'm bullish on, and one has to go with the other, why I'm bullish on the state of Arizona is because we got knocked on the canvas during the last downturn. And it woke people up, and we had to realize we have to be more proactive. We have to start thinking about how the economy grows. It can't just be the lowest tax rate or the most spending on education. You have to kind of find a balance. And so that's where I've been communicating with folks for the last couple of hundred speeches, that it really is finding that right balance, just like it is in life. But there's also intangibles. And so the reason I like to rib some of my more conservative friends about my office location is I live in Tempe, so my office is located near home. But I'm right across from the light rail station. I love the town lake. I ride around it quite a bit. I just like the atmosphere. I like the promotions. I like the vibe that I get in the community. I feel like it's different. And this is kind of what I saw in this last presentation, that not only has the economic numbers that I've been looking at, the broad base continue to improve, but I feel like the community is getting more sophisticated and understanding that you do need individuals engaged. You do need to have a marketing plan for a community that goes beyond just putting a brochure in a site selector's hand. You have to have an identity. And Goodyear, Peoria, I don't want to go through them all because then you'll know who I'm omitting. But I feel like this is a really good time to be doing what you're talking about. And just a few years ago, I would have been thinking, what kind of return on investment are you going to get from that $140,000? given how you've been growing and your opportunities going forward, and the community probably being a leader in Greater Phoenix for a lot of economic development growth, I would put in whatever you could, and then also try to tie it to the other programs that you have, because some of these programs can have economic development benefits. And the one thing I learned by working with the state and trying to get different pieces of legislation through or doing analyses is whenever you have, and I'll talk about the analysis real quick, when we got involved in education analyses, years ago, it was always, I always like to draw circles on a whiteboard. And this is true for how a community operates. So there might be a K-12 group working by themselves in an isolated circle, university group asking for a certain amount of funding, some group that would like to look at poverty but can't figure out why. Over the last year, I think we're involved in about 7 different assignments right now. All these circles are overlapping. So we have that, like that Olympic rings Venn diagram going on. And I feel like that's what each community has to have as well. You can get extra benefits from everything that you're talking about. My mind was just racing. I'm going to be thinking about it all the way home in my drive, just of all the cool ways that you can tie it to the other programs that we're familiar with because we've worked with you now and every once in a while in the past. So it wasn't confetti, but I wanted it to be a positive statement. And I'll get into the economics now, but I'm going to skip a few because you all have access to the PowerPoint. Ask questions along the way if you have any. And even if afterwards, if anybody has any questions, send it to somebody and shoot them over, and I'll do my best to answer them. And I'm always happy to talk economic development and growing the community. I'm very proud of our region and our state as a whole, and whenever I can help, I like to participate. So let's talk about some of the basic numbers. At least once a week, I do radio interviews related to what's going on with the stock market or the economic data. And this week it's been, did the coronavirus discussion impact the stock market last week? What's really happening? There's always going to be some kind of a shock. When the economy is grown as much as it has been, and especially the stock market, we're at the point in the business cycle where you're going to see things going up and down more. Don't be too spooked by it, because you'd be surprised how often we've had negative days, and I've gotten 10 different calls, and it's just be cool and let's see what happens Monday, and then things come back. What I like to look at, and I don't like to look at whether or not a number exceeded the professionals' expectations, because you always hear, well, GDP growth or employment growth was 10,000 above the expectation. That just means their forecast was wrong, because the number is the number. But right now you want to see GDP kind of in that range of 1.5% to 2%. And we're in that range. We're going to continue in that range. When you start to see this core economic data, not just the panic button type items, but the core economic data that's still consistent in what you would expect, it's an indication that we probably have another year to 2 years on the economic expansion, absent some kind of a major shock. But I always like to qualify that with, we've had such an unusual last few years. Would anybody in this room be shocked by anything that happens? I wouldn't be anymore. And employment is the other one that I would focus on if you want to know what's happening at the U.S. level. You want to typically see between 100 and 150,000 new jobs each month. This can vary. There is volatility, but we're still tracking in that range. And every economic downturn that we've had in the past always started with a consistent set of data. The story was the same with all the different data points that we show at the peak. Then you'd start to see some inconsistency. There might be an okay GDP number, but employment was a little weak, or income growth was weak. When you start to see inconsistency, that's the biggest sign that things are going to slow. And so that's something to look at as you're doing some of your budget planning. I still feel like we have a little bit of time left, but what I've advised some clients is whatever your forecast is for this coming year for your major tax categories, it's probably fine. Whatever it is next year, lop 1% off of each of the rates of growth, just in general. Unemployment rate is very low. This doesn't tell the whole story, though, because it's going to be low even when the economy slows. This gets back to why I've been spending so much time on workforce issues, because we have a lot of very skilled workers that are leaving, that are retiring, and we have shortages in key areas, some of the high-paying, very skilled areas. And it's not just the base sector businesses and the employees that we always try to promote when we're working on economic development. When the Phoenix Chamber came out with a plan for construction, I thought, what are you all doing? That's a local market industry. But we have this big gap. They saw the writing on the wall well ahead of time. We had this big gap, and we're losing a lot of highly trained people and bringing in those that aren't as skilled at a pretty high price. Now, some would argue, well, that's wage increases. That's going to help the economy. No. Productivity enhancement leading to wage increases. So getting trained is what helps the economy. When you have a shortage and you have wage increases, overall it's a net negative. So we have to distinguish between not just saying, well, people will get paid what they get paid, but how can we affect that supply and demand? And I think part of the reason that I'm optimistic is that like I said, we got knocked on the canvas in the downturn. Policymakers at the city level, at the state level, have all worked very hard to get this solid economic foundation. But now we have to take it to the next level. It's not just about growing, it's about growing well. And I think that should be a theme for this particular community and, again, 3 or 4 others, because I think that you have a chance of not just growing, but growing well and things accelerating very rapidly. A lot of it's going to depend on how you manage the next downturn. I don't think the downturn is going to be much different than what we saw in 2001. Now, you can't put 2001 Goodyear compared to today, but you can look at the performance of Greater Phoenix in 2001, where we didn't lose that many jobs. It was a very short-lived downturn, and we rocketed out of it and led the nation in growth. The only time that we were worse in the U.S. is during the Great Recession, and it was an anomaly. So if you can still make some of these strategic investments, the infrastructure investments, all the stuff that economists would normally recommend when the economy is, the expansion's getting a little bit long in the tooth. But I still love these other ones of creating an additional identity for the community. I do think that matters. When I talk to site selectors, you would be, and you all have done this too, I was surprised how often somebody would just be going through the brochures when they're at the airport waiting for their flight and tossing the ones that don't look that interesting, but then one will catch their eye. And they'll still toss it 2 or 3 minutes later, but they'll skim it. And this is an interesting community. That's what they think about. And then they're the ones that ask about the community later. Normally you'd go to GPAC, but sometimes they might consult with an economist and will recommend some communities. And I've been very proud to recommend this part of the valley. Leading indicators, it's starting to trail off a little bit. Now, it's not falling. Again, the consistent story is that a little bit of expansion left. Home prices are up quite a bit. This isn't something where I have down as a major risk, but I have it down as something that I'm concerned about in terms of economic efficiency in the community, because it's really hard to come up with a plan that makes economic sense where you're subsidizing these programs. I had to work on some low-income housing tax credit proposals the last couple of years, and a couple of them looked really good. A couple of them looked very, very bad. So it's not just the idea, it's how ideas are implemented. So sometimes somebody could have a very good idea for a marketing plan or an economic development plan. For me, all that means, that's just the name on a piece of paper. I like to see how efficiently it's being implemented. But home prices, not like what we saw last time in terms of the risk, but I am growing concerned. Less affordability. This is a problem going forward. And this is another reason why we have to be focusing not just on attracting jobs. Now, some of my colleagues have said we overproduce college graduates. We need to just focus on training for technical skills. Well, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. if you don't have those high wage jobs, you don't have the jobs that demand those technical skills. Everything kind of goes together. The economy, all these different pieces interrelate. And so we have to find that proper balance. And that's why that new economy stuff that ABOR is working on with the universities is the best plan that I've seen. I know for a fact that it's the most mathematically scrutinized budget plan in the last 25 years because that's how long I've been working on these things, and I'm the one that scrutinized it. So U.S., we still have a couple more years left on solid footing, hopefully. Let's get into Arizona. Again, we are more volatile than the U.S. if you see a blue line, but usually that's a good thing because in expansion we do much better than the U.S. I think this has been a very unusual expansion because it was an unusual downturn. And if enough of our communities and you get support from the state do things right, we are going to be rocketing into the 2020s. And I've been predicting publicly that it could be our strongest expansion ever in the 2020s if we do things right. And if that's the case, then certain communities that are leading the way are going to be seeing similar growth. And again, you want to have volume of activity. You want to be able to keep your sales tax revenue because you have to invest in infrastructure. But I think there's going to be a lot of additional really cool opportunities coming this region's way. So we're still a solid bet. Population growth, and here's an example of what I'm talking about. If you look at 2018 population growth, we're number 4. The preliminary job growth for 2019 is number 3 in the country. That's great. I've said this before. You can't count Idaho because when you open a Circle K and you double your employment base, you're going to move up in ranking. But in this case, Utah and Nevada. Nevada has a much weaker economic foundation. Utah has been doing a great job with economic development. Salt Lake is one of our biggest economic development competitors. I'm not worried about Idaho, but I am worried about some of the other states up there. Arizona employment, 2.6%, not too bad. Greater Phoenix, though, 2.9. And unlike prior discussions, I'm even becoming a little bit more optimistic about the Tucson region because I'm hoping that we can link up the university down there better with the community and bring in this kind of management style into southern Arizona. And it won't be competing with Greater Phoenix. I think it'll be enhancing it. They still have a long ways to go, but I feel like all these little things, in the past, all those other little separate circles, people working in silos, now all of a sudden these things are being discussed in the same meetings. That's the biggest signal. When you see communication between different groups and you're on the same page, it tells me a lot. Employment still improving, but lagging the rest of the state. Balance of the state, very weak. The rural parts of Arizona have recovered very poorly. We're probably going to continue to see that, and we're going to have to be working on some very unique programs in some of these areas. And we don't have to go through and try to move the needle all in one year. One thing like I would like to see with some of the rural areas is better apprenticeship programs. I'd like to see some funding put aside where a company that can't maybe afford to hire that person that's not quite as productive yet gets that little extra subsidy through an internship program like up in northern Arizona, would be, through the university. Flagstaff has additional challenges. If any of you have Googled Jim Rounds and Flagstaff lately, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's a joke later. You'll look it up. It's the only time I ever fired a client. Single-family home permits, still looking good. Let me just skip through a few of these. This is the fun part. So this is what the state downturn looked like in 2008 versus what we saw in 2001. And so that pattern is the best guess right now. Now, it could be worse, but in terms of your planning on what you have to start putting together the next couple of years, these are the rates of growth in different categories. You might want to take a look at Maricopa County's historical sales tax revenues, some of the other cities, what they experienced back then in terms of the reductions. But when we looked at it, it matched that particular pattern that employment shows. Everything's a different scale. You know, sales taxes would be going up by 9% during expansion and then slip just a little bit during a downturn, even if it's mild. But I'm not as worried. This is what was interesting for me. So population, this is everything you already know. Doing great. Projections are very solid. Single-family housing permits, it's going to continue to improve. Home sales and prices, again, things are moving in the right direction. Multifamily housing permits, as the community develops, as it becomes more dynamic, there'll be more economic rationale for multifamily and single family and supporting jobs and new base sector jobs and categories that you maybe didn't even consider in the past. So one thing that I would recommend is that as you go through your strategic plan on the economic development side, that you have your baseline optimistic goal, and then you have that shoot for the moon type of a goal, because I do feel like that could come up in this particular community. I wasn't going to put these in because they're very messy, but I wanted to make a point. So CoStar's a very reliable data source in just taking a look at commercial activity in different regions. Now, the forecast was for what I thought looked to be kind of mild growth going forward, but it doesn't really match the economic data and the broader story. And so the reason I put some of these in is I think that the overall forecast might be a little bit too conservative. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case in a community that has evolved so rapidly and has a solid footing, but doesn't have that 4 or 5 years of data that some of the other analysts look at when they just are looking for, to produce a forecast. They're going to be more conservative with the development forecast here than you're going to see in some other areas that have been growing more rapidly. It's like, for example, let's say Gilbert and Goodyear had the same opportunity in a particular industry. The forecast for Gilbert would be more than here just because you kind of have to prove yourself in a way, but you already are to some extent. So I think in some of the growth areas, you're going to, your forecast might be understated. Yes, sir.
Brandon, would you talk in the microphone so I can
Sorry.
hear? Thank you.
So you're saying the vacancy rate there, that's how much potential we could potentially be missing out on or could reach up to that forecast there?
So on that chart, it's showing that absorption and deliveries is negligible. Vacancies are going to be going up. I don't buy it. I think that it's going to be more optimistic than that. Now, this isn't factoring in an economic downturn. Maybe this could be a temporary downturn scenario, but then it should be picking up in, say, 2023 and 24 much more rapidly. Now, I'm not criticizing CoStar in any way. We utilize their data a lot, but you do have to understand that in some cases, MAG data is useful for certain things, but then you have to adjust it. CoStar data is useful for things, but then you have to adjust it. You have to adjust it for your unique attributes. But I think that the overall forecasts and projections for what's going to be happening here will be understated going into the 2020s in almost every case. I think the opportunities in the next expansion are going to be fantastic.
Yes, Bill?
I think to maybe piggyback on that a little bit, if you look historically, we have always been undervalued when it comes to retail potential, restaurant. I mean, we see that on a very practical basis, and we joke about it with our restaurants. They come in nervous, afraid. They build this very small footprint, and within a year they're expanding. And we saw that with the theater. We see it with a lot of the industry that comes here. And I had the opportunity last Monday after the council meeting to talk with George Getz, and he's helping develop our Civic Square project with Class A office buildings, et cetera. And even he was talking about the frustration that he has in marketing Class A, trying to get a tenant ahead of time. And he finally came to the realization that if he builds it, he's going to fill it rather than filling it before he builds it. So I think we see that historically. So I would tend to agree with your previous slide, which is we're not going to see that giant disparity between the demand and we're not going to see large vacancy because we just don't have it. And I think folks they're afraid of what the West Side has to offer. Are you in agreement with that?
Yeah, I think that comment was spot on, and it's going to change though. And there'll be different opportunities, even in the downturn, there's different opportunities to, again, mitigate the harm, don't get too behind on some of your projects, still be able to promote the community. But that also will piggyback on what the state's going to be able to do if they make some of the right investments going forward. Again, the higher ed stuff, the infrastructure, trying to take the greater Phoenix area from being a tier 2 tech community to tier 1. And I'll show one chart in here, which is the most discouraging and most hopeful. It'll make sense when I put some narrative behind it. But yeah, yes, I agree. And quite frankly, I don't know the extent that you have to be super active in these areas, but for example, we're the economic consultant for the League of Cities, and I've learned so much about the different challenges that they've had, just the challenges from each of the different communities, very good relationship with some. There's, sometimes you butt heads with people. That's just the case with everybody. But what I'm encouraged about is when we were talking with the League about the higher ed investment, and I had to calculate, so just for one example with ASU, their budget request was $46 million a year ongoing. That's just a starting point for their request. It's different than what the governor put in. So we did an analysis based on what we thought they could get out of that, what they reported, went back and forth dozens of times, really scrutinized it, and showed that after year 10, it's a net benefit to the state in terms of tax revenue. But when you calculate a benefit to the state, you look at state expenditures versus state tax revenue. If you add in local, it was going to break even in year 4. And so there's a bigger impact on local communities than I think sometimes is conveyed. And I would love to see the communities much more involved in some of these state discussions. I don't know where it stands here, but I like at least where the League is going and wanting to understand where things are, because that's a powerful argument. I'd love to see not just myself showing some numbers and then the staff from the universities presenting at the Capitol. I'd like to see the mayors down there saying, here's the type of benefit we're going to get if we even realize a portion of this growth. Do you realize what we could do with this revenue? So the circles between the different levels of government, I think, can start to overlap as well. And I have no reason to believe that that you wouldn't be interested in pursuing that over the next several years. So I hope you have a good relationship with the League. I couldn't quite tell. No one smiled and said, yeah, Tom, but.
I'd like to get your thought on, I always hear that the number of people that are unemployed are less than the positions that are available out there across the country. And it seems like there's this gap between the skill sets that employers are needing to fill versus the people who are looking for work. And I guess my question I was trying to get a feel for you is, how do we address that issue in a state side? I'm sure it's even bigger than that, to try to align some of the universities and some of our focus on trying to fill those positions so they line up. Do we need more apprenticeships in the business world to try to bring them out of high school to get them the skill sets, whether it's welders or any other type of apprenticeships, to get them right into the workforce? How do we go about that in this changing economy? Because you're talking about now AI being on the forefront. You're talking about the automation being on the forefront. And at some point, we got to make sure that we're keeping up with the skill sets needed to meet those future growth. And that falls right back into your productivity issue, as they become, those skill sets start to match. So how do we go about addressing that issue? Or I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
So over the years, there's been a lot of discussion at the Capitol and among communities on what would you like to accomplish. And the goal is we want to have a more skilled workforce. Now the discussion's starting to get into how does poverty issues in K-12 impact overall achievement levels, which will impact our ability to provide workforce and also cause an economic drain in terms of state expenditures. And is there a cost-benefit analysis of addressing that issue? So it's shifted from let's just work harder and throw money at something to here's a project. That's how I run my business. I don't just say, when I have a staff meeting, just say, any ideas on making money. I think that we can get involved in this area because I think we can contribute. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do we have connections? You have to be very specific. And so what I'm liking, again, is those circles overlapping. There is an analysis that's going to have to do with poverty and how that might impact the various communities. And that's going to be through Rodell. There's going to be a business sector-led effort as soon as we're done with the university budget defense on what would happen in terms of the overall economy in the state and in Greater Phoenix if we can take our achievement level up another 5% and then to the U.S. average, and then what happens if we exceed the U.S. average. Now, just doing some preliminary numbers, we're talking billions of dollars in tax revenues over just a few years when you get everything back into alignment. And I think sometimes you have to put that context, especially with state policymakers. You have to explain, if we do this, do you believe that we can increase the rate of growth in our job base by a tenth of a percentage point over 10 years? And usually they would say yes. And I say, okay, I just made you $800 million over the next 10 years. Do you think that our average wage of new jobs coming in, the base sector jobs that we're recruiting, could be $1,000 more than what we currently have with the right setup? Yeah, that doesn't sound like a whole lot. All right, there's another $1 billion. So we get to the point where you can't run government like a business, but we can bring in some of this math. And the great thing about math is, the bad thing is that oftentimes people that can do the math aren't very good storytellers. And so there's a lot of analyses that the state has looked at in the past that have been great, but no one really understood it. You don't need a 200-page report anymore. Sometimes you just need a memo saying, we looked at this, here's how we looked at it, here's the story why it works. Let's get together and let's figure out a plan to implement it. Sometimes you just have to simplify and be more proactive. But I am encouraged that we're trying to address that in a more specific way. The tough part, though, is we still need to figure out how to get those high school students that are maybe impacted by poverty, maybe are going to be underachievers longer term. If they may not be going to a university, how can we show them that in some of these different trades, be an electrician, whatever it might be, you can make a lot of money. If you're in construction, it's not just about banging nails on a truss in 120-degree heat. There's all sorts of different jobs out there. So I'm hoping that we evolve in how we discuss it, but we break these things down into digestible units.
Thank you.
I put this in only because I got the numbers and I thought, wow. And so I really don't have a point on any of this other than in reading everything that you've been working on and catching up over the last year or so. This is impressive. This is really impressive. And what I liked is that this really validated my opinion of the community and why, we've been, promoting it as a great destination. So this was just really to compliment you all. Probably running long, so I'll try to speed up on here. Again, the main issue is when we talk about minimum wage issues and we talk about how government can be involved, the biggest thing is to try to help people move up their career ladder. And how can we create new programs so they can jump from a smaller ladder to a larger one? And I always like to discuss economic development like curling. I use this a lot because we also have to recognize, and if you're familiar with the sport of curling, you throw a stone down an ice path, and you have these people that look kind of funny, but they brush ice in front of the stone to slow it down, on the left of the stone to make it go the other way. They can guide it. The stone is the economy. Public policy is the sweeping. The sweeping is what won the U.S. the gold medal for the first time in the last Olympics, because they were masters at hitting the target based on a good read of where the economy is going. And so some things are out of our control, but it's how do we manage that direction? Lots of things matter in growing the economy, and this is where I got through to some individuals that were very, very focused just on tax cuts, and I'm for very competitive tax rates. A lot of the tax rates that people have complained about the last handful of years from the jobs package from a few years back, I'm the one that designed it. The 5% corporate income tax isn't what reduced the number to what it is. It's the credits that weren't really reviewed efficiently. There's a lot of things that matter in terms of economic growth, and we always have to keep that in mind. Now, in terms of the cost of a downturn, this is just a little bit of a heads up on how a state could impact individual communities, and what you all in the league and others will have to be working on is, even though we have $1 billion in the budget stabilization fund and extra money, and some of it's going to be spent, it takes about $2 to $2.5 billion to get through an economic downturn that's mild. So $1 billion in the stabilization fund, a lot of people are arguing we should spend that on K-12. We need that to set ourselves up to have that crazy solid 2020s in terms of our expansion. So the same recommendations for the state as what we were talking about for the community, but I feel like they're listening more than in the past. Let me just go a couple more. Okay, this is, I'll end it on this one. So I showed you how we were growing the state, top 5 in terms of job growth, population growth, personal income growth, and state GDP. That's fantastic. But we don't compete with other states. Communities compete with other communities, and metros compete with metros. And so when you take a look at where Greater Phoenix stands in terms of a proper adjustment to per capita personal income, which is a measure of quality, you have to adjust it for cost of living, you have to adjust it for the working age population, and about 6 other different things. But when you do that, we're actually lagging behind most of our economic development competitors. We're lagging behind Denver and Salt Lake and Austin, and I could go down the list. I think after talking to economic development experts, we identified 11 primary competitors, and we were doing better than Albuquerque. But I think our goal should be to do better than many of these communities. When you evaluate this, though, you also want to evaluate it against yourself. So it's like playing golf, where you could be playing with somebody that's better than you, but you're really playing against yourself. You're trying to improve yourself each time. We need to evaluate where Greater Phoenix stands in these categories. And right now, I feel like with the right policy, that little uptick on the far right, I don't think that's an anomaly. I think we're going to start to see that move back up. And I think our goal should be to get back to 100, so our per capita personal income matches the U.S. And this is a story where some people haven't really accepted in some cases. They haven't liked some of the reports where we identified it's math. The data is the data. There's nothing to dispute about it. But I look at it different. I like to say we've been top 5 in all these great categories. We're doing really well. We are a leader in innovation, bringing in more high tech and everything else, and we just got started. That means our opportunity is much better than a lot of our competitors who have already been doing some of this. So I think we can catch up very rapidly by, again, focusing on the high wage jobs, taking care of those shortages depending on where they are, coming up with new programs. And so this somewhat discouraging slide is why I'm the most optimistic about our region. I don't think I have anything all that great on the rest. Oh, take a look at this later. This is just when I was talking about a 1,000 increase in new jobs. That's $400 million, 25% increase in business recruitment, $1.8 billion over 10 years. Very minor changes in your rate of growth can really change your fiscal fortunes and allow you to be competitive, be fair to taxpayers, and also invest. Any questions? Any additional questions?
So, Sherry?
Oh, that's what I was going to ask. I didn't get a copy attached, so if we could get a copy, that would be great. And then I have a question about the economic impact about the I-11 corridor. Obviously, that's still kind of being planned and stuff, but how do you see that as impacting the West Valley?
Oh, he has a different opinion. I
yeah,
can see it on his face.
I guess it was Brewer, right at the end of our term, had the Commerce Authority hire us to put together an economic development transportation report. And it was probably the most complicated and best report that I've written. It was just a little bit too early, but we took a look at economic development benefits and to what extent do you need to see some of these rates of growth to help pay for some of these improvements. And as you know, if you tax somebody locally to build a pyramid and then you pay somebody else to destroy the pyramid, you didn't really create economic activity. It was a loss. You can't just build a road to nowhere, but if you can be strategic with it, congestion eases, but we don't give up on other areas. Like I still feel like there's a lot of work to do on I-10. As long as we're strategic and we don't get to the point where we have to come up with some ridiculous tax increase to pay for it, I'm optimistic. Where I'm not optimistic is none of the groups that I've worked with, and I won't say any names, but none of the transportation-related major groups in Greater Phoenix understand how this investment translates into economic development opportunity, how to monetize it, and how to figure out if some of these projects are going to pay for themselves. Now, what is different from that versus where we're seeing this education and workforce training going? Because we're doing the math on the other stuff. We have to start doing the math on the transportation side as well.
I have to laugh at that because the discussion of MAG and the hesitation to work another plan, and they already, most of them in the different cities, it's just, they talk about no tax, no this, no that, and how does one do it if you don't reach out and change your tactic to what we're going to do? But it's across the board political.
Yes.
If we could just get the parties out of it and sit together and really work on something, but it comes in each time and you see that, and the statements are just so positive. You just can't do that. I mean, I can remember saying, well, why don't you give the assignment to all the mayors in the cities and let them reach the citizens and tell them the circumstances if we don't do something. Tell them the truth and then see what the opinion is. And if you brought all the different opinions from all the different cities, I think you'd hear what the citizens want because it does affect their life. It, more than that 1 penny or a half a penny or anything, it does. So.
And this is what we try to do. So this is a different example. But when I was doing that analysis, I was meeting a couple of the economists at Goldwater once a month at Honey Bears in downtown Phoenix. That wasn't the best for our health, but it was sure good, and it made for a fun conversation. But it was if we can show that the communities and ADOT and, you know, the just everybody dealing with this at the regional level are being efficient with their queuing of projects, they're analyzing it, and we can blend it with economic development, something that costs $20 billion. If all we do is increase the rate of growth in a community, and this is the argument, the first time I used the argument, I said, if we don't take care of our transportation system, do you think that our rate of growth could decline by 1/10 of a percentage point? And they said, yes. If we take care of it and we become even more competitive, do you think our baseline rate would go up by 1/10 of a percentage point? And they said, yes. I said, I just paid for 3/4 of your project. That's the mentality, but that's not what happens in practice. And it's not just a government thing. I think it's because it's a big government thing. It's not something where you could be working on economic development and a lot of the local planning. I think things sometimes fall apart at the state level because it's just too big and it's hard to get the right people in the room. But this is where people have to be a little bit more open-minded and sometimes work across the aisle.
So do you think that things like SR 30 are less important than I-11, and how do we balance that?
Well, so I can't answer that because I don't feel like there's been enough analysis of it for me to say this is a project where these two projects, because they have a bigger economic development impact, we could do two projects instead of one. Or what would the right queue be? Where are we going to have the best economic benefit if we have, you know, more fluidity on 10 going east and west, which is that ADOT Key Commerce Corridor document, which has been the same thing for the last like 7 years. It just says left, right is good. We have to do math at some point, but it's doable. We're working with Pinal County on some of these things because they have a lot of economic development leakage that has a massive cost on the county. You know who in Pinal County came up with the idea of asking us to figure out the economic development leakage? The transportation person.
Yeah, I believe that. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much. It was enlightening. You could see people council taking notes. That should be a compliment to you, and we appreciate you taking the time to come out.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks again for having me.
So let's give a round of applause because that was all right, we're towards the end. So council, you have the table here. Do you have any comments or commendation, reports, occurrence?
We have more
Oh, Lori, I'm sorry. We're going home.
I'm going to move over here where the tools
Yeah, I'm
are.
sorry. I got lots on the calendar
We'll try
tonight.
to be quick. How's that?
Thank you
Oops,
for
and then I went
reminding
and
me,
shut it all
Council.
off. Let's see. I haven't actually gotten out of
Thought you
here.
were there just listening.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. All righty. Yep, we'll try to make it quick. We traditionally, this is the time when we present a 5-year forecast and give you some of that information. But we'd actually prepared our forecast before we asked Mr. Rounds for his input. So I'm just going to quickly go through. We're not going to show you all the numbers that we normally show you, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at for the rest of this year, next year, and then our 5-year forecast. You know, pretty much our forecast is what's going on in the economy and what's going on in the environment. The environment, as you heard from Mr. Rounds, is something you can influence with that brush in front of that curling stone. And with those two factors, we kind of line up what our revenues and expenses are going to look like for the coming year. The economy, we don't have a lot of data about Goodyear itself. We do have data that we can get on the Metro Phoenix area. When we do look at that data, we do see that in some cases Goodyear is performing better than the Metro Phoenix area. We see how residential building permits are growing at a higher rate here. Retail sales are. The minimum wage is something that happens out there that we didn't control. It does have some positives for us in that when those restaurants have to pay higher wages, their prices go up, and we have higher growth rates on things like our restaurant and bar taxes that we've seen over the last couple of years. So there's things out there that we might not be able to do a lot of control over that have some impacts to us, pluses and minuses. And so, as you've seen in the past, we do use some of that regional data to kind of inform the trend with how we forecast where we're moving forward. So you've seen from us before the data from the Eller School down in Tucson, their forecasts. They're one of the entities that do provide forecasts for the metro area. Wanted to just show you here, we've converted our data to calendar year for this purpose because their forecasts are on a calendar year basis. So the little line up on the top, the darker color line, that is our retail sales tax growth in the last 2 years. So we grew at 11.8% in calendar 2018, and we estimate calendar 19 at about 12.5%. We technically didn't have the last of the sales tax payments when we pulled this slide together. The light green line and the pale pinkish line are what the forecast for both personal income and retail sales tax growth for the valley. So if our trends continue, we should be above that level. Retail sales drops about to 4.3% growth there in 21. Again, that's growth over prior year activities. So all of these lines are showing what would be the equivalent of growth in our revenues. Building permits. So this is residential building permit data, again, converted to a calendar year. So if you're familiar with the building permit data that we're often sharing, these numbers will look a little different to you because we took them on a calendar year basis. But essentially what you're seeing there is the darker colored bars are our actual experience for residential building permits. And then the lighter colored bars are if we take the projected growth rates from the Eller School for the metropolitan Phoenix area for permits. That's the level of permitting we'll be doing in the next several years. Again, at essentially the same very high levels we're currently experiencing. Technically, there's some negative growth rates there, but they're have no material impact to what kind of activity we might be seeing. And again, that's assuming that we perform at the same level as the metropolitan region. By way of example, for calendar 2018, we had 14.5% growth in residential permitting. The region, metropolitan area, had 6.9%. That gap kind of closed in 14. We were pretty close to the regional average in terms of the growth rate there. In terms of the environment, again, won't go in a lot into this. You kind of heard Mr. Rounds say some of these things. We do have more ability to control the environment. The things that you do in terms of economic development, where we focus those efforts, do impact our future in terms of who comes here, what kind of market we have here. The programs and services that you decide to offer or grow are important, and of course those quality of life projects that we're very focused on right now all influence the future of the city. Another thing that you do is you prepare for the future. We have very sound financial policies and practices. You are doing some of those things of putting away resources now, addressing those infrastructure projects now while resources are in good stead. You know, we have our asset management plans. You've got the funded capital plan. You also plan ahead by setting aside for those operating costs of those capital projects. We aren't just building projects without an understanding of what they mean to our future. You establish a solid contingency. A very important practice we follow is that we align our ongoing costs with ongoing revenues. We make sure we aren't adding something that we're going to have to pay year after year without a revenue that will support it year after year. And we also have some debt management policies that keep debt under control. So kind of with that background, this instead of giving you some numbers, I'm just going to give you kind of what things look like relative to each other. The light bar, which is greenish color, represents this year's budget. The next bar with the striping in it represents our current estimates for that same category. And then the darker colored bar is what we're projecting for next year. So the first bar is the general fund balance. So that actual bar is higher. You've already gotten that information. We reported to you on the annual financial report, or the CAFR, how year-end ended. Keeping in mind that increase we were planning on and hoping to have to fund the Civic Square project. And between last year's results and what we're projecting for this year and next, we will have adequate general funds to support the Civic Square project as we projected would occur. The next group of bars is the sales tax. Current year, we're at about 10% growth in our sales tax over last year. Next year, you'll see much smaller growth, as is our norm. We're assuming conservative growth rates, only about 4% growth next year over this year's estimate. You heard Mr. Rounds say that if whatever your estimate is, you can probably achieve. We could probably still bump up our estimate and be able to achieve that for next year as well. State shared revenues, you'll see, look basically flat. Growth rate's fairly small in those. We have not built in a population increase. We'll explore if we think we're ready to prepare a population increase. We've only had a couple years under the new model. Otherwise, we won't have that population data until after you adopt the budget. So when we come back later on, we might have better numbers on that state shared, and we may add a population estimate and let you know that we've done that. In terms of the development fees, again, that's another area where we've been conservative in our estimating. You'll see that the bar for next year is higher than this year's budget. What we're currently looking at is going ahead and maybe starting to cut down on that big extra fund balance we end up with, and being able to plan those resources in the CIP. So we have added an estimate for a one-time portion of development-related fees. We haven't done that in the past. We've estimated the ongoing portion, but for next year, we're proposing adding an estimate for the one-time. Again, conservative compared to the current year, lower than what we're estimating for the current year, but more realistic in terms of what might actually happen. And then as you look at the others category, there is a little bit of good news. The Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority, we will be receiving a payment this year that's unexpected. So that is a new thing. And then it will be coming in the following year higher than they're expecting to provide us with this year. When we come back later on, you might also see in that others as the resources that the general fund receives from the enterprise funds for the services we provide to them, the manager's office, the finance department, the HR department. In that category of others is both those charges that the enterprise funds pay the general fund, and it's the fees we charge for services we provide, such as parks fees and development fees. We're doing that study right now that you funded a couple years ago on our cost allocation and our fees, and we may see some changes in those numbers as that study is completed when we come forward again. In terms of expenses for this year and next, same concept, our budget next to our current estimate, next to the next year request. You'll see that, we always experience some savings. And we always should experience savings. We never want to be in a situation where our budget isn't high enough. You'll see the bar for next year's base budget, which is the first group, being a little higher than this year. With those great revenue numbers, we also have a few people that we have to reimburse based on the revenues we receive. So one of the reasons for that increase in the base budget is something like those sales tax agreements where we're required to reimburse based on our actual revenue collections. And we do have some obligations to keep the impact fees whole in cases where we have development agreements that cap those impact fees. So that's part of the reason for that increase. And then, of course, we're still working through developing the base budget and we're in labor negotiations, and so that may also change those numbers as we come back to you later on. We aren't reflecting any one time for next year. That comes through the supplemental process. The third grouping of bars is the existing CIP. All that we've done is take the 5-year CIP. We're still in the process of updating the CIP, but we have lowered the current year number because we've accounted for that Civic Square project next year where most of those expenses will occur. So that's primarily the reason why that bar is a little lower in the current year. You'll notice we have a bar there for the CIP operating costs. That's the ones that we've been preparing for with our operating costs set aside. And we are, when we put all these numbers together, we're prepared for that. We'll be able to cover those operating costs. It's primarily the major portion of what's there are the recreation campus operational cost and Fire Station 188 staffing are the major elements in that number. It's about $5 to $5.5 million. The contingency is the standard, the 15% of operating revenues. We obviously take that out of the estimate. It becomes available to fund next year's contingency. And then the last group there is others. One of the things, some changes you'll potentially see there when we come back is we are nearing completion of a facilities asset management plan. I think it's the last kind of general fund area that we haven't got a firm asset management plan. So we'll believe we'll be ready to come forward and have that plan be funded as well as we move forward. So in the bottom line, when we look, we don't have those revenues and expenditures right next to each other for you, but essentially we can cover our CIP operating costs. You will have resources to fund ongoing, some ongoing supplementals and some either new capital projects and one-time costs. But just be, there won't be enough resources to fund all of the requests that are come in, which is typical for any budget year. So we're looking for next year to be similar to what we've been experiencing recently. In terms of just the 5-year look, I'll just call out kind of the couple little bumps in the road. As you remember, and kind of was, as you saw on Mr. Rounds' presentation, a small adjustment in our revenue estimates makes a big difference in these numbers. So again, very conservative revenue estimates. We've dropped sales tax growth down to 3% per year here. When you look at 24, so this is your ongoing forecast, you see that the lighter colored bar is uses and the darker color bar is the revenues. So you'll see we fall short a little bit there, as is the norm. We will certainly have that corrected by the time we get there. The primary reason you're seeing that is that's the year that the O&M payments we're receiving from Newland for Fire Station 186, that ends in 23. And we also received some O&M payments from SEDEA that is collected on as permits are paid. We also project that commitment will have been made to us by 23. So 24 is the first year we'll feel the full impact of both of those revenue streams having dropped off. But if you look at it by 26, we're back to where revenues are ahead of expenditures. So, I think we would probably characterize this as probably looking a little better than last year's projection. So, and then this is your one-time forecast. Again, a little bit more up and down here because it has the CIP in it. You want?
Sorry, Joe
Sure.
had a question on the past
No problem.
one.
On that 24, even though those revenues are going off, haven't we been putting money aside to make up that shortfall?
Yes, you're correct.
Since that's going to balance out anyway, correct?
Yeah, that has been one of the things we've been preparing for in the set aside.
Sinking fund, so to
Correct.
speak. Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions on that one? All right, go ahead.
No. And then on the one time, again, there's more up and down here where your sources and uses are a little out of whack. That's primarily the existence of the 5-year CIP. When we prepared this year's 5-year CIP, we knew we had some years where we had more resources that we needed in later years. So you'll see 22 is higher. We were planning on that already because we needed that for the 24 capital projects. And then, of course, in 25 and 26, you show a bigger gap between the planned uses and the resources that are available, because we don't actually have the CIP projects yet for those years, so there's no CIP projects loaded into those numbers. It's basically just the contingency and the one-time portion of some of the transfers. And that's all that I have. I don't know if you have any other questions or
It's a
comments.
delightful presentation and the information and good feeling. Yes, Molly, I'll get you, Joe.
I've got a quick question, Lori. Would you refresh my memory? How long will we receive payments from the Sports Authority? I know it's more than once.
Not a long time. Doug, do you know?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had that up your sleeve.
No,
so sorry.
I just know it's in the next 5 years. It's more than 5 years.
The Sports and Tourism Authority gave us a 10-year forecast through 2031, and payments will continue after 2031. They stopped at 2031 because that's when the Prop 303, whatever the sales tax associated with the Sports and Tourism Authority, sunsets at that time. But the other side of the payments we get are from the Maricopa County Stadium District, and that will continue to pay until we have been paid back from everything for the Indian Stadium.
Okay, so and that money goes to the general fund?
Correct.
Can some of that money be used to our one-time CIP? Is that our choice?
We have, last year, we reviewed with you the recommendation that we treat those as ongoing revenues because they're long-term. You always have the option to use your ongoing resources to pay for one-time items. We
I'm
just
so
don't want
glad.
you going the other way.
Okay, got
We
it.
don't want you to use one-time money to pay for ongoing.
Okay. And my last question is, how often and how do you get the data on Goodyear? I know for the sales tax, we have to wait until the county or someone tells us how much we have, because we don't collect that ourselves.
Right, so the sales tax, if you're, for the month of December, if you're a business, you have to report your sales tax by January 20th. So we start getting some of those payments in the middle of January, and then a couple come in early February. So we get that information. It's a month or a little more behind when we actually had the business activity to collect those revenues. So some of the changes, we haven't seen holiday sales tax yet. We're close to seeing it all, but we haven't seen it quite all yet.
So do we know what the development fees are right away?
Yes, development fees, other than the sales tax, we collect our own revenues, so we know what they are as they come in. So every day, the development-related departments record the revenue that has been collected from their activities.
Okay, well, Doug, you and your staff are doing a wonderful job in estimating and not, I'd rather you a little underestimate than over, because we can't always make up anything. We don't have another revenue stream somewhere in our pocket. But thank you very much. That's really exciting news to know we are on such level footing.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Joe?
Just a general one. I suspect you're going to have it in your presentation move forward, but it would be nice for an executive summary which shows the ongoing general fund revenue that's for the new year, and then how it's applied, broken down by categories, and then the new ongoing for the enterprise fund and how it's eventually broken down and how that all mixes. And then the one-time, the same thing. Here's all our new one-time money, and here's how it is broken down, and here's what it covers for both that and the enterprise fund. You can do an executive summary because you're going to have a lot of detail and pages behind that. It's easy to explain to the outside when you see it that way. Say, had 3 million, out of 3 million, 1 million went to these positions, 1 million went for, you kind of get my drift on that. So when it's laid out like that, when we talk to our constituents, I may be able to read the book, but trying to explain that to them as opposed to that executive summary, it makes it so much easier when you're speaking to your constituents. So if you could work something like that, I'd appreciate it.
And the next time we'll be back to you with budget-related activities, we'll come back to have you approve the financial policies here within the next month. And then we'll present the manager's budget, and we'll include information such as that to help people understand the budget that we're presenting.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to thank you for the good news. Everybody around this table should be smiling about that. Staff should be really heralding all their hard work on this in your department. It's greatly appreciated, and I remember the years we've gone through just recently. We couldn't leave the table smiling and feeling confident. You couldn't give the suggestions that you gave tonight because you've done so well. So thank you very much. All right, so this time I'm right, we are at the end, okay? So council, you have any comments? And Vince, anything you want to contribute tonight? All right, city manager, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I just wanted to report on our 15th annual Heart and Soul that we had over the weekend. Had a beautiful weather, and I'm pleased to report that our runner registration doubled over last year. There was 843 runners, and there was also 100 dogs. Wanted to give a special thank you to the volunteers, the supporters, and the staff, and we'll have a full report with some pictures for council in your regular weekly report.
Very good. All right, nothing else said by council. Our next meeting is a work session followed by a regular meeting on February 10th, beginning at 5 o'clock. There being no further business to discuss, this meeting is adjourned.